Okay, yeah. I'll look at that. That's the only thing that's working. Anyway.
Good morning, brother.
Good morning. But it's okay. I got plenty of love, I don't have to worry about it.
How are you?
How are you doing?
I'm good.
Good.
You have plans?
Not right.
In time.
I'll let you. I mean,
Kids.
oh, okay. Okay. She was moving slow.
Hey,
Hey,
how you doing?
here.
I'm glad.
You know, in 15 years I taught, none of my students ever did that. Just stand up and they get quiet. All right, we're good. There we
I've
go.
been trained by Daryl.
There we go. Summary slide is up from the historical perspective of instrumental music. That's kind of where our topic has been the last couple of weeks. Today we're going to dive into what I will say very broadly church history. I don't mean specifically the Church of Christ. I mean what the world considers to be the church. As far as a denominational look into when instrumental music was introduced, and then we'll dial that into a little bit about what the Bible has to say about it. We're going to get there. I mean, it is Bible class. We should probably have a Bible in the Bible class. So that's kind of the kind of get your mind sort of refreshed as to where we were the last couple of weeks. We'll skip this slide, and here we are. We touched on this last week. This is where we'll start. We have these leaders up here. We'll just I read through this last week, and I'll do it again here, and then we'll get into a side tangent that I'll blame Kelly for here in a little bit. Martin Luther identified the organ as an ensign of Baal. John Calvin is quoted here: musical instruments in the celebration of the praise of God would be no more suitable than the burning of incense, the lighting of lamps, and the restoration of the other shadows of the law. John Wesley: I have no objection to instruments of music in our chapels, provided they are neither heard nor seen. Adam Clark: I'm an old man and an old minister, and I here declare that I never knew musical instruments productive of any good in the worship of God, and have had reason to believe that they were productive of much evil. Music as a science I esteem and admire, but instruments of music in the house of God I abominate and abhor. This is the abuse of music, and I here register my protest against all such corruptions in the worship of the author of Christianity. Codebearer and Hauser, scholars of the Church of England, in a commentary of Ephesians 5:19, says, "Make melody with the music of your hearts to the Lord. Let your songs be not the drinking of heathen beasts, but psalms and hymns, and their accompaniment not the music of the lyre, but the melody of the heart." McGarvey, it is manifest, and we cannot adopt the practice, which is that musical instrumental music, without abandoning the obvious and only ground on which a restoration of primitive Christianity can be accomplished. And Spurgeon, he preached for more than 20 years to literally tens of thousands of people, and adamantly refused to incorporate instrumental music into his worship services. One of the questions that was asked last week was when, during their lifetime, would they have seen instrumental music, or when was instrumental music introduced into the religious traditions that they were responsible for? Well, I did a little looking, and I'll save you the rabbit hole that I went down. We'll summarize it here. But this was fascinating, Kelly. I really appreciated the prompt here. Okay, so here's kind of a little summary slide. What is it? Lutheran. Who founded it? Martin Luther, although if you know anything about Luther, as you've written, don't call yourselves Lutherans. He didn't want to create a separate denomination, so to speak. He wanted people to go to the Bible. He was about literacy. You can see when he was around, and this one was really frustrating. When was instrumental music introduced into the Lutheran Church? The general acceptance was it was Bach's fault. J.S. Bach. He was Lutheran, we know that. There's no real evidence to support instrumental music before he existed, and there's a lot of evidence to support the organ in Lutheran traditions after he existed. We also know that Bach was, of course, the greatest organist who's ever lived. And so this is a bit of an inference here. We do know that Bach was a church musician. We also know that he had played a lot of solo literature, of course, and the majority, not all, but the vast majority of his works were either titled or had lyrics based in scripture. And if you didn't know that, almost all of his titles are directly out of scripture. We also know that he was employed by a church, and so that's kind of the general acceptance. It was Bach's fault. He died in 1750, Bach did. And we can see some of the first evidences of Lutheran instrumental music around 1720, 1725. Okay, Presbyterian traditions. This one was also interesting. There's a couple of different dates here. John Calvin, 1509, 1564. And then the 1630s date is what one subset of Presbyterianism believes that was the beginning of the Presbyterian Church. It kind of depends on who you talk to. Some call it founding in Scotland. Some here would say 1630, some as late as 1646. But it gives you the idea. Either way, their big debate was whether or not we're going to include harmony in our singing. That was fascinating to read through that. Read through about 300 years of music history in the Presbyterian tradition. They were really concerned about, is it even appropriate to have harmony in our singing? It was almost the Civil War before they introduced four-part singing as a general acceptance. Anyway, instrumental music, scattered references in the 1850s, more likely closer to 1900. The first definite reference of instrumental music in the Presbyterian tradition was 1907. Baptist, John Smith, 1554 to 1612. This was another one that was very adamant against instrumental music well until the Civil War. During the 1850s, again, scattered references that may or may not have actually been a part of a worship setting. 1859 was the first definite reference to instrumental music being used in a church building, and specifically in a Baptist church building. 1868 is there because that is when the debate for instrumental music versus a cappella singing in the Baptist tradition was really in full swing by that time. So we have kind of narrowed it down to this 9-year period, and of course, the Civil War was occurring during that time. So it was more likely 1866, 1867 before that was really getting started. Oh, real quick, Presbyterian architecture. That was another side tangent that I went down. The Presbyterians deliberately created their buildings so that it would not fit an organ. That was really interesting. There was an accepted way to build a Presbyterian church building all the way until 1920 something, and it was deliberately intended to not fit an organ in there. That's interesting. Methodists, John Wesley in the 1700s. Take a look at those dates. I chased this for almost 3 days because I didn't believe it. But yeah, 1943, there was a council meeting of the leaders of the Methodist Church. And in 1943, the meeting concluded with each individual division of the United Methodist Church included, Free Will United Methodist Church included. Each division, each church could decide for themselves whether or not they wanted to include instrumental music or not. Before 1943, it was essentially no. It was a ban by the leaders, the top leaders. It is a hierarchical structure. 1955, the ban on instrumental music was lifted. It's not that it was approved; the ban was lifted. You can interpret that how you like. Yes, sir.
I was in the Methodist Church in 1943 in a small town in Indiana that was using instrumental music. When I went to college at Purdue in 1956, the Methodist church I went to was using instrumental music. I think those dates ought to be 18 instead of 19.
I thought the same thing, but I found a document from the leaders dated 1854 that it was a very strong ban on instruments to be used within the congregation. Just like anything else today, like to say that the churches of Christ don't use instrumental music, I think is also, it's just a widespread blanket. That is, if we attribute things in a general way, it's incorrect. There are churches of Christ with that name who use instrumental music today, right? Even though the churches of Christ are a cappella only. I kind of feel it's the same way. The documents that I found are the official documents that are published, but what individual congregations do or what cultures do within this country or globally, I think, could vary some. But I would agree. I think these dates are much too late for any sort of official, definite hard line. But that's what's published. Anyway.
I just know that it was, instrumental music was widespread in the Methodist Church in the 1940s.
Absolutely, I completely agree. That's what I found. I myself grew up Methodist. There's a long history of instruments being used there. Well,
nobody else has been alive that long
to be able to say in the 40s. I mean, you can't get any more primary source than that, right? So, there it is. And then, of course, Catholics. I have to throw that in there. So the Catholic tradition. I know we've been over this a lot. As far as the history goes, the thought over here was what sent me down this route. Was what sent me down this because officially the papal decree on how worship should be conducted within the Catholic Church still does not allow instrumental music. But yet we have organs housed everywhere, right? Why? So went into some looking, and I went back just a couple years, literally just a couple of years. So here's a couple of things that I want to bring out. March 5th, 1967. Anyone remember that day? I don't remember. Okay, so anyway. 67. My mom was 13. Okay, Papal Decree, March 5th, 1967. The Pope officially recognized the organ as an instrument in permitted worship for the first time in Catholic history. Okay, it would have been used for hundreds of years before then, but it was the first time that a Pope recognized the organ as an actual instrument of worship. 1967. Okay, I have a feeling that this is much like the days of the Methodists, where they officially recognized it in 1943, but it had been used for some time before. This is also part of the Papal Decree in 67. The organ may be played as a solo instrument before the priest reaches the altar, during the offering, during communion, or before and after Mass. It may not be played during singing. May be played during worship, but not to overwhelm any voices should any be speaking. This papal decree prohibited every other instrument, as the Pope says that all other instruments are suitable for secular music. Instrumental music was prohibited entirely, listen to this, during Advent. When is Advent? That's roughly Thanksgiving to Christmas. So as a music nerd, one of the biggest performances you can offer during the entire year is what? Your Christmas Mass, right? And the organ's prohibited in 1967? What? Okay. Okay, also prohibited during Lent. When is that? Call it Easter. It's late February to roughly Easter. It's also prohibited during the Sacred Triduum. That's for Thursday, Friday, and Saturday before Easter. It's also prohibited for any time of year during the offices. The offices in Catholic Mass are three specific prayers to represent the offices of Jesus Christ. That is the prophet, the priest, and the king. During those prayers, you may not perform any instrumental music at all. And you may not have instrumental music during Masses for the dead. That's pretty limited. In 2004, Pope John Paul II emphasized the value of singing over instrumental accompaniment. He also permitted the organ in line with the 1967 decree, but he also, in line with the 67 decree, prohibited all other instruments from worship. He writes, sacred music defined today often include repertoire which cannot enter into the celebration of worship without violating the spirit and the norms of the liturgy itself. This is from the Pope in 2004. Starting to get the idea that instrumental music is kind of a man-made thing. It's what we want, it's what we like. Okay? Yes?
Was 1967 the year of Vatican II? Is that?
I have no idea.
Okay, because I know a lot of things, like it was permitted at Vatican II to not have to eat fish on Friday. I know that's a big thing back home, and there were a lot of changes, and I was just wondering if, that coincided with the decree on instrumental music. I'm trying to get my timeline right.
I don't have the slightest idea. I went back from the 1967. I read papal decrees back to 17 something, and none of them had anything to do with music. So that's the only focus that I was on. So I'm sure it coincides with something. And the 67 decree was not isolated to music. It was very long and detailed most of what should be going on in a Catholic Mass.
Scott?
Yeah.
I don't know if you're going to get into more of this, but I've been studying with a friend of mine in the Christian church regarding instrumental music and the split that happened between the Church of Christ, the Church of God, and the Christian church. And I found it interesting that how the organ was introduced was it was essentially snuck in to a building in the middle of the night. This group that is now the Christian faith believed that the singing was so bad that they needed to introduce an organ to make the music sound better. And that was, as I was reading this and studying this, I found it interesting that they were so close that they had to sneak it in. It was not even a decree or anything. It was just a group of members. So to go to your point, it's a man-made belief. It's a man-made, the selfishness that they had, a desire of their own.
Absolutely, absolutely. I've heard that there's all sorts of, I don't want to discount it, but almost like tall tales of these, how this all occurred. It's most of the stories, especially in the modern age, the last 100 years or so, revolve around some sort of clandestine operation to get this in. We're going to talk a little bit briefly, but not specifically to that. Okay, let's move forward here. Okay, so I want that, Kelly, thank you for that question. That I'm sure was not exhaustive, but that gets us to the point that I really wanted to get to, which is kind of the instrumental music is about as a we us feel. It's not for God, right? It's not, and the widespread understanding. No matter how you slice it, no matter which path of worldly Christianity you go down, instrumental music was widely rejected until really the last 100 years or so, 200 years. So let's get to the Bible. How do we know what is accepted and what's not, or what is scriptural authority? Three basic types. You have a direct command like in James. Is anyone among you suffering? Then he must pray. Is anyone cheerful? He is to sing praises. We have an approved example, type of authority, where we have an example of the apostles doing something, or Jesus doing something. And of course, a necessary inference. These are things like, the example up here is of course related to music, but this would be where the saints would gather. Well, we can do that in a building. We can infer that a building is permitted because we can meet here. Okay. Just kind of take these little compartments and we're going to build them up here in a minute. Okay. We had a question a couple weeks ago about solo. Here it is. This gets really thick really quickly, so I'm hoping to kind of keep this on the surface level here. Solo and psalmos are the two Greek words used to describe types of music in the New Testament. These words existed before the first century Greeks, and just like some words today, they had different meanings than they had years ago. Can you think of words that are maybe used or not used today because the meaning has changed so drastically? Sure. I mean, we don't need to say any of these out loud, but sure. There are many words that have changed in meaning, but not necessarily the spelling. Okay? There's a word for joy that I'm thinking of at the moment that has changed so drastically that it has become almost offensive to use today. And that has happened in just a few short years. I remember growing up in school learning that word as the defined word of joy. And I just turned 40 this year. And within 40 years, we've had some significant changes. Look at some of these dates. 900 BC to 300 BC, that's 600 years. The meaning of the word solo was to pluck, or to twang, or to twitch, as that of a stringed instrument. Okay, now we've been over a little bit of history. What stringed instruments existed from 900 to 300? There were really only two, the lyre, the kithara, and then some variations of those two. Koine Greek, which is written in the New Testament time, very popular version of it, it meant to praise. And I put a cappella there not because a cappella was part of the definition, that's because we will use this a cappella because that is ultimately where the term a cappella has come from. The Koine Greek meaning is solo. A cappella is an Italian word from Latin, meaning from the chapel. Eventually we changed to from the choir, and that is where we get a cappella now. When we say a cappella, we're really saying from the choir. which is, of course, we know that to be vocal only. The Koine version of solo was the same thing. It's where the Italians got it. Like I said, this gets really thick. Here's a summary statement. Whenever solo or solos is used, there are no remarks alluding toward instrumental music where the word solo is used in the New Testament. We'll get into this a little bit of Hebrew also, but there are some marks, there are remarks, there are accents, so to speak, that indicate a usage for the word. It changes the preposition, it changes the article, it changes just a lot of the details around Greek. Those of you who know Greek, you know what I'm talking about. There's nothing around, anytime that the word solo is used in the New Testament, there are no marks, meaning it's just the default definition of the word. We know from, what I'll say, extra biblical sources that are also used, like secular documents in Greece found at the same time. The word solo means to sing. It doesn't mean to play an instrument. It's not using the definition of to pluck, to twang, to twitch. It's using to sing, because to use the word in referencing an instrument, you must have certain articles with that. Yes, sir.
In the lexicons, the really good ones like Art Gingrich and even Vines, which is very popular, Vines Expository Dictionary, it will break down the periods of transition, where the word transitions to the meaning that you described there. And sometimes it'll, like, I think in Art Gingrich, it'll call us, in modern times, it denotes to sing a hymn or something along that line. And in the context, so modern times, not the Koine time, was, so there, and that fact is so well established, but those that push it, they completely ignore it.
You're absolutely right. It's so well established. It's like asking somebody to identify a color between red, blue, and green. It's just a statement of fact. But you're right. I think you're right. Vines, I think, does say like to sing. It adds a little tag on there just to clarify, like to sing praises or to sing in a choir. The praises in a choir is, I will say it's an add-on, it's an interpretation, so that to clarify the sing part. I don't think you can get any clearer than when it says to sing what it is that we're supposed to do. So I don't think the addition to as from choir is necessary, but I think it does that for clarity. Yeah.
I was just going to reference too, I know Thayer's Greek English lexicon uses this definition to pluck, twang, but he also says, but by the time of the New Testament meant only to sing.
Yeah, it's so well established. Look at Ephesians 5:19. Speak to one another with psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs, and sing, that's solo, and make music in your heart to the Lord. If you take a look at the word sing in this context and you apply it to pluck, twang, and twitch, that means that every one of us are going to now be commanded to pluck, twang, or twitch a string instrument. We'll just leave that there. Okay. Authority of silence. But there's no mention of instrumental music in the New Testament, therefore we can do it. Right? Okay, let's take a look at this. There's a reason for silence, right? The scriptures equip us for every good work, 2 Timothy 3:16. If the Bible doesn't tell us something, then it's reasonable to conclude that it's not essential for either our happiness or required for what is acceptable or pleasing to God. Deuteronomy 29. The secret things belong to the Lord our God. The things revealed to Him belong to us and our sons forever. Silence is prohibitive. Deuteronomy 4. You shall not add to the word which I'm commanding you. Proverbs 30. Every word of God is tested. Do not add to His words. But these are Old Testament scriptures, Scott. Okay. Out here we have two doors. One says men, one says women. The word only is missing. tell me that silence isn't prohibited, right? Authorized personnel. Okay, what do you do with that? Let's find out. You know, I mean, no, silence is prohibited. It has been. It always is, right? Think about if you're ordering parts from Amazon, you're getting online, you're making a selection. Do you have to go through everything that Amazon offers and say, no, I don't want this? You know, silence is prohibited. Yes, sir.
With prescription medication, if you apply that logic or tell people, you know, if you take blood pressure or have a narcotic pain pill that, you know, says one pill every 4 hours, it doesn't say you can't take all of them, because we know people that take more than that and they die.
Yeah.
That's called overdose. So it's very selective on what they want to apply it to.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, selective application for sure. Okay, aids or additions. It's also brought up a couple weeks back, but here's kind of a summary slide, right? Genesis 6:14, make an ark of gopher wood. Well, Noah had to have used that with some tools, maybe a hammer or a saw or his table saw out there, you know. Just plug it into a generator. You know, it's an aid. We can do that, right? We can use these things to create the product because we're not having to. If you were to have substituted out and used oak instead of gopher or cypress, I think it's the leading theory is what that is, then that's an addition or a substitution. It changes the word. 1 Corinthians, bread and fruit of the wine. We can use plates or cups for that. But to substitute out or to add to it, I've heard of a congregation here and there where we have our communion, but we do that over a meal together with our lunch, and that's our communion, where we have grape juice, we have bread, but we also have a potluck dinner at the same time. That's not what that is. You know, that's adding to the word. Hebrews 10, to meet and to encourage one another. We mentioned that a little bit. Now, this was interesting here. This was a note from long before TV worship, and I put this as a subtraction. Now, interesting note here. And I don't want to open up a huge can of worms because I'm sure that every congregation has been through this. Like, everyone I've ever known has been through this. And I just kind of want to poke a button here, just for a little bit. What are we doing right now? We're streaming online. The Edmond Church of Christ, where I primarily worship, is streaming online right now. A lot of churches are streaming online right now. Is that a subtraction from God's word? I just want to put that little question in there. And I would actually argue no, not in this case, because we are gathering together the saints for a worship service. What I'm talking about here is a heart issue. If you're sitting at home and you're watching, let's say, Joel Osteen, and he's preaching, and you're doing nothing actively, I think there's a problem there. But to join together to use modern technology in the way that we use it, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think there's something to be said for that. And I think that and I want you to keep that in mind as we move forward. It's an issue of the heart. To sing praises, we have a songbook for that. But it doesn't add to the worship. What about musical instruments? The first instrument I ever learned was the steel drum. I was 9. And I learned piano, clarinet, saxophone. By the time I graduated with my undergraduate degree, I was proficient in 36 instruments. I'm telling you this, I can't play any of them without thinking about how to operate it. Even the saxophone, which I majored on, I can't just simply pick it up and play thinking about just the music that's coming out of it. I've got to think about my fingerings, my tone quality, how I'm operating how I'm articulating on it, my breathing. Am I balancing correctly with the other musicians? Or are there other musicians to balance with? The last thing on my mind is what the audience is experiencing, which should be our first thing when we are praising God. That's an addition. Yeah.
Were you able to sing while you were playing the saxophone?
You know, I never could. I was not skilled at that. I could hum and play the flute, but that's about as far as I got. Anyway. Okay, these are all little, what I'll call like little Chinese takeout boxes, right? Little tiny things that have a lot packed into it. And so all together, here's what this looks like. We have four different points of view on one truth. Here it is. Tradition. Virtually every denominational leader was outspoken against instrumental music in the worship assembly. Semantics. References to music in the New Testament are uncontestably vocal. I didn't really go over that part, but nobody disagrees with this. Secular or sacred scholars, if you want to call them, nobody disagrees that the first century Christian worship was exclusively vocal. Nobody disagrees. Authority. God's silence logically concludes that instrumental music should be absent from the worship assembly. And aid or addition, instrumental music does not encourage worship. It actively participates, not necessarily worship, but it is an active thing. It distracts from worshiping in spirit and in truth. Questions?
Just had a comment on that last point there. It's also, it is an addition, but it's also a subtraction in the fact that if you look at the verse you have under Ephesians 5:19, the person playing the instrument can't speak as commanded to do when performing a song or a hymn or spiritual song.
Absolutely true. Absolutely true. Now, of course, my whole background is in instrumental music. Bachelor, master's, and doctorate is all in instrumental music. So considering that, I can't listen to the radio. Like, I'm not listening to the words. I'm listening to what the band's doing. You know, that's and then I'll catch the lyrics later on the second, third, fourth time. But I'm like, oh, that's what this song is about, right? Like that's, part of that's maybe job hazard. You're absolutely right. It does distract. Kelly.
Not to take away from your excellent lesson, when I was continuing my time so I could retire through GM, I was down in Arlington, Texas for 9.5 years. If I wasn't able to come home to worship for that weekend, I sought out a local church down there. And each time I went, I thought, well, I'll just pick out a church close to where I'm living. And each time they had a praise team and a worship team, where the praise team had 7 different song leaders, 4 of them were women, everybody had their own microphone, and they had worship teams, and it was very troubling. Where is this in the scriptures? And I thought, okay, well, that was a fluke. So I go to another one the next time, same thing. And I discovered that through the Dallas metro area, and here in Edmond, there's at least one church that has that now here. So that is a new thing that is sprouting from a movement, and I don't know where it originated from.
The general thought and justification for praise teams is you open up your book and you have 4-part harmony, right? And so the general scope of music literacy in the United States over the last 50 years has declined significantly. And so the idea of, well, here's a bunch of music. It would sound great if we could have this harmony. That would be amazing. Innocent enough thought. But our congregation can't read music. So what if we have, we'll start with 4, a soprano, alto, tenor, and bass. And that way our tenors can latch on to and then we have, and you go, that's the justification for it. It seems innocent enough, but where that leads very quickly. We'll actually get to that here in a little bit. So actually a fantastic segue from this. The last 30 minutes or so, we've taken a very brief look at what Scripture has said. I kind of glaze over that. I don't really go too deep on that because it's something that, at least for this particular audience, I'm sure we're familiar with. There's no authority. We know where we can get our authority from, and there isn't any. And it really is that simple. But then how do we deal with that? We don't live in a society today that rejects instrumental music, right? How do we deal with, say, outsiders who say, oh, well, I've heard these things. Every one of these are things that I have heard when talking with either students or other members of either within the churches of Christ or elsewhere. Methodists, all sorts of things. You may have heard some of these too. Okay, common justifications. Oh my God, I pull up my notes here. All right. It is traditional to include instruments in worship. Do I really need to go over that? No, it's not. Instrumental music was introduced about 1,000 years after Jesus, and it wasn't even accepted for about another 500 years after that. I don't see anything wrong with instrumental music in worship. The operative term there is I, and that is the problem we begin with. Worship, I would call that ignorant worship. Acts 17. Paul addresses the Greeks' religion to superstition, to an unknown God. Right? They're ignorant. You don't know what worship is. If you don't see anything wrong, the problem is you're focusing on the wrong person. Right? I like it in my worship. Similar. Your focus isn't on the right thing. Colossians 2. Since you died with Christ to the basic principles of this world, why, as though you still belong to it, do you submit to his rules? Do not handle, do not taste, do not touch. These are all destined to perish with use, because they are based on the human commands and teachings. Such regulations indeed have an appearance of wisdom. With their self-imposed worship, their false humility, and their harsh treatment of the body, but they lack any value in restraining sensual indulgence. Colossians 2, 20 through 23. I'm also, just a little side note, I like it in my worship. It's kind of like they have in the Bible, right? Offering strange fire. It's like what they like. It's found in the Old Testament. Or instrumental music was commanded and blessed by God in the Old Testament. It's a different kind of worship. John 4, yet a time is coming and now has come when true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. For they are the kind of worshipers the Father seeks.
Isn't that kind of self-answering where it says that it was commanded? Yes, it was.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that one has some problems with it. New Testament commands us to use our gifts. The common justification on this one was 1 Timothy 4:4. They would use this scripture. For everything God created is good, and nothing is to be rejected if it's to be received with thanksgiving. It's taken out of context, though, just like so many other things are. We're to use our talents. We don't put it this way. If we are to use our talents in worship, why don't we see, like some of you practice law? Let's set up a desk, right? So we're the surgeons, you know. I think we can go really far. That's ridiculous, right? Maybe I'll just leave that on there. Yes, we are to use our gifts, but for what purpose? The worship of God is something special, and it needs to be held sacred. Instrumental music is a non-issue in Acts. Okay, Christians met in the temple courts where instrumental music occurred. Therefore, Christians were not offended and therefore accepted instrumental music. That's the argument. Well, the temple held roughly 210,000 people, and so it was used as a popular meeting place. It was easy access for the people to hear the gospel. Remember in Acts 3, one day Peter and John were going into the temple at the time of prayer, about 3 in the afternoon. Okay, for what purpose? Why that time? There's a lot of people there. What would be going on? Of course, it was the time of prayer, so other people there had that purpose. Peter and John were going for a different purpose. But it was also a time when they could preach the word to the masses. Had nothing to do with music. Yeah.
Would they also want to apply the rest of what was happening in the temple to the New Testament?
Yeah. There you go. Okay, would Woodland Hills Church of Christ in Nashville, Tennessee. This is one of two case studies that I want to bring to you. They use instrumental music, and they published the reasoning to support it on March 29th of 1990 in a bulletin called Love Lines. And they write, direct quote, "The world is not comfortable with our tradition-based services. Hence, by the introduction of special music and religious drama, the hope is expressed that the church might, quote, catch more fly from honey than with our traditional format, simply preaching the gospel." Missed the mark. The preacher of the congregation commented later on that he didn't find any problem with instrumental music in worship because it attracted several people to services who would not otherwise be in attendance. Man, we can miss. We get so close and miss really, really far, right? Okay, we'll go through these last ones here quickly. You're just being legalistic. I hope so. John 14, if you love me, you will obey my commands, right? Okay, I've heard this. If you just pick up the Bible, no one would conclude that instrumental music is unacceptable.
You have to open it.
I mean, arrogant, right? I mean, 2,000 years of people have opened the Bible and have concluded that same thing. Isn't it odd that we're commanded to recite or sing psalms that describe the things that we would be forbidden to practice? Again, referencing the Old Testament. The justification for that statement, by the way, comes out of 2 Chronicles, when the Levites are commanded to play instruments in the temple. Again, that is very specific. It is conditional, and to apply that outside of that very specific context is just flat wrong. Yeah.
They were also commanded what instruments to use.
Exactly. Yeah. No, it was very specific. You're exactly right. That's exactly right. Okay, that was our second bell. We'll pick up here, and then we'll look at one other case study that's here in Oklahoma City. And then from there, we're going to kind of give you the scope, like the big picture here. We looked at instrumental music historically. We looked at it from a biblical standpoint. We looked at it from denominations. Now we're looking at it from what it means today. Following this, we're going to look at the opposite side as to why should we sing at all? What is the benefit to singing? It turns out there's a pretty significant reason, or a lot of reasons why we should be singing together in congregations. Thank you, guys.
Well, thank you, brother. I'm gonna get up in a minute. Good morning, brother. Hey, all right.